All right, I believe we are live now. So, hi, everybody. This is Ashlyn. For those who do not know me, I am here tonight with my former union representative, Kayla Mock, whenever I was working on the Bernie 2020 campaign. And Kayla, you've been doing this for a long time, so I thought you were the perfect person to talk to about organized labor, organizing the South, and just kind of the history of unions and what can we do down here. So if you want, you can go ahead and introduce yourself and also introduce who you have with you, Lisa.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, Ashlyn. Thank you for calling me out for doing this for a very long time. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm really, really excited to be here. We're talking about two of my absolute favorite things, which is labor organizing and organizing in the South. So yeah, I'm super stoked about this. So thank you. And so again, my name is Kayla and I'm with Lisa Harris. She's one of our members here in Richmond, Virginia. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but I'm going to start screen sharing here so we can get things rolling. Okay. Can everybody see this?
Yes, I can. This is
Perfect.
Great. Thanks for putting this together.
Okay. Well, hopefully this works. Fingers crossed. So welcome. So Ashlyn gave me a very broad topic, which is, labor and organizing in the South. And so I could talk for days on both of these topics and probably days on all of the topics that we're going to talk about tonight. So this is a very brief overview of a very complicated subject matter. And so if folks want more information about something I say or want to know where something came from, I'm more than happy to put it in the Facebook event page or wherever Ashlyn tells me to put information. So I would also, these things are always like talking into a void. And so I would love, do people have a chat option on the Facebook live stream?
So I will monitor the chat and then
Fantastic.
I'll let you know if there's any questions or comments at a good point during the
Great. So because I would love to go back and read people's comments as well. So if folks could put in the chat if they have any union experience, if there were members of unions or used to be union members or had a great experience or a terrible experience, the good, the bad, I would love to know what folks are working with down here. And so, yeah. And so tonight, we're just going to kind of do a little overview of unions, like who we are, what we do. We're going to talk about power because you really can't talk about labor organizing without talking about power dynamics and what is power and how do we shift power to workers who often don't have power in their workspaces and in their lives. We're going to talk about, how do workers organize? What's this process look like? This very complicated process. The challenges that they face, particularly in the South, the history there of labor organizing in the South, our Southern afflictions. And then not only that, but like, how do we win? Because regardless of all of these challenges and lack of power, workers still continue to win. And that's the most amazing part about this. And so I'm really excited to talk about this. And just to note, these background pictures here are from the Frito-Lay strike that's happening in Topeka, Kansas right now. They've been going since July 5th. They walked out on strike for a lot of reasons, 84-hour work weeks. They called them suicide shifts. There's also someone wrote a letter to an editor talking about when a coworker died at the plant and they just were told to move their body and they kept the line rolling. So we stand in solidarity with the folks in Topeka, Kansas, and shout them out for what they're going through right now. And much love and respect to them and what they're facing right now. So as Ashlyn said, I'm an organizer. So what does that mean? Well, it means a lot of things. But my basic job is I get to go talk to non-unionized workers about how to get a union. I also get to go talk to folks in our union shops who are not union members about how to become union members. And we'll talk about why that happens in a little bit. I've been a member with UFCW Local 400, my union here, for 22 years. I joined when I was 17. It was supposed to be a 2-week job. I started working at a grocery store in Manassas, Virginia, my hometown, where I currently still live in kind of the northern part of Virginia. And, it was a 2-week job, and I just kind of stayed. I had good benefits. I had good pay. I worked my way through high school. I worked my way through college. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And my union rep was like, you want to come out and work with us for a little bit? And I was like, sure, and came out and did politics and went back into the store, and came out and did organizing and went back into the store. And in 2012, I got pulled out on an assignment to organize and talk to Walmart workers. And it was eye-opening to see what workers go through in this country. As a union worker, I was very privileged in my life. I didn't know that non-union workers didn't have breaks, right? There's no federal law about breaks. There's no laws around workload. There's no law around workers can just be fired for no reason. And so it was just mind-blowing to me. And so I really caught organizing fever, and I didn't look back. And so I've been an organizer now with UFCW 400 for about a decade now. So I live in Virginia, which is still very much a southern state. I know y'all in the deep south don't think of us as a southern state, but we are firmly below the Mason-Dixon line. And while people like to brag that we're blue now, we're blue. We're hanging in there. And it's still very much a purple state. We still have very, very deep red areas. And only through painstaking grassroots organizing in this state have we come this far and been able to get the things that we've been able to get, and are hanging on to them, right? And hopefully still hanging on to them. We have elections this year, so fingers crossed. Just a note, like I said, I'm a big labor nerd, and in the labor world, we love our union acronyms. We love our union jargon and lingo. And so if I say something and I don't explain or I use an acronym and you're like, what is she talking about? Please just throw it up in the chat. And if Ashlyn could let me know, I'd love to clarify anything that I say that doesn't make sense. So who we are. Like I said, this particular union, and there's tons of unions, as you can see. If we've got LIUNA, which is for painters and construction workers. We've got USW, which is the United Steel Workers. We've got CWA, which is the communication workers. We've got tons of unions. My particular union is the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. Our international union represents about 1.3 million workers in US and Canada. We organize around these major industries. So we have grocery, retail, meat packing, processing, warehouse and distribution, chemical workers, our growing industry of cannabis, which is very exciting, distillery workers, and healthcare workers. We've also dabbled in political workers and campaign workers. Like Ashlyn said, we were very proud to represent the first unionized presidential campaign staff in Bernie Sanders, which was amazing. We also last year just organized and won a contract at the Virginia Democratic Party, which is super exciting. Nonprofits and mainly Dems. Actually, I think all Dems state parties now are organizing. I don't know if we've had a Republican, interesting, organized yet, but campaign workers, it's a booming industry. And so my particular local represents about 30,000 members at 39 employers working in 743 locations under 56 collective bargaining contracts. We represent 7 states. And so we've got DC, good slice of Maryland, a good slice of West Virginia, a little bit of Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, and then Virginia. So we've got a big freaking union and a lot of contracts. So tonight, I'm really excited to be joined by one of our amazing members, Lisa Harris. Lisa is a 14-year Kroger member, which I cannot believe she's been with us for that long. So thank you, Lisa. She's super active here in Richmond, Virginia. She's currently going through a contract fight with her company, Kroger, and she's actually out working on political member-to-member organizing with us right now as we have an election every year in the state of Virginia. And so Lisa was a frontline worker during COVID, and she was brave enough to share her story about what she went through during COVID. And so before you get to talk and share your story, I'd really love to share a video that the Brookings Institute put together talking to her and some of the other frontline workers about their experiences over 2020. And they just released this video earlier this year.
I am currently the numbers 2 person in the meat department, and I've been in that capacity for the last 12 years.
I started when I was 19 at my local Kroger.
My mother's always told us to make sure we take care of our community. I've been there for 44 years.
I'm a single mother of 6, a grandmother of 5, and I have been working in housekeeping for over 16 years.
I had a full range of emotions, some of them being fear. I was fearful.
I paused it.
Am I going to contract this virus? Initially, you can see the fear in people's eyes. And you see a customer that you know every day, and now you see them, they got a mask on, they got gloves on.
I choose to keep my family safe, so I have not seen them in person since COVID began. I come out to my car to eat on my breaks, which also leads to a feeling of isolation.
Being a housekeeping, you'll never know what a patient has, so it's scary.
To see people dying, I see people I went to school with and grew up with, and they'll come in, and just like that, they're gone.
We are risking our lives. I have asthma, and I just got over pneumonia in February. But I take that chance to go out here to work because I know we have to survive.
I see 300 people a day. I'm grateful for my health care that the union fought for.
We know we're not immune to it, and we're constantly exposed. But if I was that person with COVID, I would hope that somebody will take care of me like I'm taking care of them.
I have learned now not to get as close to patients, but right now I have no choice because they have no visitors.
Mostly grocery workers, such as myself. A vast majority of them are black and brown, and those are the people that are really being affected by this coronavirus.
Everything is expensive here. Sometimes you take home pay won't take you home, you know what I mean?
Watching my associates have to deal with people at the door act in a hostile manner when being asked to put on a mask for less than $15 an hour.
These are people who work very, very, very hard and get very, very, very little.
We no longer get hazardous pay, and this hazard is still out here, and so you feel like a slap in the face.
There are people who are working here that are checking out people's food who are buying their own food with food stamps.
The techs and the EDS workers and the respiratory therapists, their job is just as important as any doctor or any nurse, but you're not getting the respect and the compensations that you should.
I want to see workers like myself get paid more than minimum wage, to be honest with you, to have money saved in my bank account.
I feel like the world has got a glimpse of how hard things are for people who are frontline.
People who have sucked up their fear every single day and marched to that door, not knowing whether today would be the day they catch it, deserve recompense for that.
You're doing important work. They need to be compensated for that. You know what I mean? They need a good health care plan. You need paid vacation. That's what I think a good job entails.
We need to make sure that we're taking care of those that serve us every day.
So Lisa, I really appreciate you sharing your story over 2020 when everything was going on. And so I will let you take it away.
So I was asked to come and share my story today. I, like I said in the video, started with Kroger when I was 19 years old. I'm 33 now. I've been with the union for all of that time. But for all that time, I wasn't actively engaged in the union. I was paying dues. I didn't understand quite that a union is all of us. It's not just the people at the top who step in and get stuff done for you. It's everybody. I was challenged by someone who is coming in to organize for a better contract to take a more active role in my union. And I went to a vote for new changes to our contract and was asked to do an internship with the union. And that experience opened my eyes to a lot of things that I didn't know the union did. Kayla, I was in a class with her, and she illuminated what could be done. And the fact that we're, taking care of each other, it's not the company anymore that has your back. It's all of us together standing as one. And the heyday, which I'm sure Kayla will talk about a lot more later, of unions, was during the Industrial Revolution, trying to make sure people had, like she said, breaks and lunches, 40-hour work week, all that. And we're going through a technological revolution right now. And I don't think younger folks especially are plugged into that information because it wasn't given to them in school. When you take ownership of what happens within your union and you ask around and say, what can I do to help? You'll find there are a lot of things you can do to help. And, that you will have the opportunity to have your voice heard by people like Brookings who advise political leaders. It's, a chance to say something back to folks who would not give us hazard pay while doling out a $22 million bonus to our CEO. So yeah, here I am at 33, hoping to do as much as I can with the union, and hoping they'll continue to let me use my voice. So thank you, Kayla.
Always. Yeah, your voice, Lisa, is one that we appreciate, and your story is one that we appreciate. And it's members like you who make this union a union, right? It's not the building that we operate out of. It's not me. It's not your union rep. It's the workers really coming together. And so I think, that takes us beautifully into kind of our next section, because it's like, what actually is a union? Like, what is a labor union? We're sitting here talking about them, so what does that mean exactly? And so, the way that labor unions are defined is it's just organized workers who have united for power to negotiate working conditions and other benefits through collective bargaining. And so that's a really fancy way to say that workers come together to talk about common concerns, and they come together to talk about those common concerns with management. And the very intent of labor unions is to level the playing field between workers and the boss, workers and these giant corporations, through organizing and collectively bargaining. And what I would mean by collectively bargaining is it's not just you one-on-one bargaining with your boss. It's you and your coworkers talking to your boss about power dynamics and about how your pay sucks and about how you need more vacation, right? And by doing this, by collectively bargaining, by standing together and organizing, that's how we realign power dynamics for working folks in this country. And so to understand power dynamics, we really got to understand what power is. And I think MLK, I'm not going to argue with him here, you know, really defined power quite beautifully when he said power, properly understood, power is the ability to achieve purpose. It's the strength required to bring about social, political, or economic changes. In this sense, power is not only desirable, but necessary in order to implement the demands of love and justice. And one of the greatest problems of history is that the concept of love and power are usually contrasted as polar opposites. And so really, power simply means that you have the resources to make change, whether that change is at your job, in your life, socially, culturally, economically. Power is just the ability to achieve change and purpose. You know, and there's a few types of power. There's the power of organized people. When they come together, the change that they can make. We have beautiful examples of this in a lot of grassroots movements like the civil rights movements, the Black Lives Matters movement, the Fight for 15, which is a Southern, you know, fight for raising minimum wage to $15 an hour. Organized people make change because they have power. There's also organized resources. You know, a lot of politicians have organized resources and no organized power. But if you're doing it right, you've got both. And so labor unions at their best, hopefully do both of these things. They organize people and they organize resources. And I don't necessarily mean resources like money, although that's very nice, but we're talking about community leaders, politicians, right? Political activists like Lisa. Those are types of resources that we're looking for. And so, you know, when you're thinking about power, think about organized people and organized resources and those abilities of those folks to achieve purpose. So let's talk about power in your workplace, because that's really why we're here. There's tons of different power, right? Like political power, community power, all those good things, but we're here to talk about labor power. And so when I'm talking to workers, and I like to talk about the power dynamic in the workplace. And so I always say to them, tell me something you want to see changed in your job. And they'll usually say, you know, the boss, he doesn't respect me. Or I always ask for Wednesdays off because I need to be with my kid and they never give it to me. They give me Thursdays off instead. Or I only get a week of vacation and I've been at my job for 7 years, right? And so I'll always say to them, have you ever talked to your boss about that? And it's about a 50-50 split. You know, sometimes they'll go, oh yeah, I went and talked to him. And sometimes they'll go, yeah, I'm not going to talk to him. That's not going to do any good, you know? And so if they have talked to them, I'll say, well, how did that conversation go? And 9 times out of 10, what workers tell me is, it didn't go anywhere. Like if I've got a good boss, they listened, they heard me, but nothing happened, right? If you've got a really good boss, maybe something changed. If they had the power to make change, a lot of times the lower level boss doesn't even have the power to make change about pay or vacation, you know? And so if you've got a good boss though, you know, they have the power to make these changes. And so, you know, power, when you picture yourself as a worker and talking to your boss one-on-one, it's not that powerful. You're a little powerless because the playing field isn't still even yet. So the way we talk about power dynamics is how do we get that power dynamic to shift? Because that's what workers really need. And so imagine going and talking to your boss with you and 5 of your coworkers, right? Would your boss perk up a little bit and pay a little bit more attention? So imagine going and talking to your boss about you and 10 of your coworkers, or 15 of them, or 20. Or here in Kroger, we represent 4,000 workers, right? So imagine 4,000 workers collectively going to the boss of Kroger and saying, We deserve more for what we've been through and what we put ourselves through. And we do the work. We were on the front lines. We were the ones dealing with crazy customers. We are the ones stocking the shelves and freezing our butts off cutting meat. We are the ones who do the work. And so we deserve to have a say in our job. And so power is just coming together with our coworkers, talking about our common interests, and funneling that like a megaphone towards the boss. You know, a lot of times unions like to use this phrase, oh, we're the voice of working America. I think that's like our UFCW logo. We're the voice of working America. I don't speak for people. I don't speak for Lisa. I didn't speak for Ashlyn when she was on Bernie, right? Folks can speak for themselves. I'd rather think of it as like a megaphone where we just put it in front of people and it collectively amplifies their voices. So that's all organizing is. That's all that has to happen for that power dynamic to shift. You know, so community organizing is all about building a grassroots support. Organizing, workers organizing, it's about identifying the people around you with whom you can create a common, passionate cause, and it's about ignoring conventional wisdom of company politics and instead playing the game by very different rules. That's all it is. When workers organize around common interests and hold management accountable to change those things, they've gained power over their workplace, their lives, and also workers, by doing this, have really shifted the cultural and social economic fabric of a lot of things by organizing. And so, you know, we've talked about what happens when workers organize. You know, and again, that power is just the ability to achieve purpose. And so how do workers actually organize? How do they come together and get their unions? And the truth is that it's kind of a boring process. It's, you know, unions are regulated by the National Labor Relations Board. It's a government agency that oversees everything unions do. They also run if workers, you know, want to vote on your union. They're the ones who set it up, or get rid of a union. They're the ones who set that up too. Same thing, just in reverse. And so, you know, this is kind of the process for union organizing. And the process, the bones of it is kind of boring. It's what happens in between these steps that get really fun. And so I want to talk a little bit about the process for union organizing, and then I want to tell you guys a story about Lipton tea workers who were able to win their union back in 2016 against all odds. And so, you know, the first step is pretty easy. You know, the union organizer will say, you know what, I think I want to target these guys over here. Or most of the time what happens is somebody reaches out to us and they say, you know what, I work at company X and I want to organize a union. At this point, you start building support. You do this little step here on the low, usually on the low, because when the boss finds out you're organizing a union, they're usually not very happy. And we'll talk about how the boss fights in a little bit. But you start by talking to the people that you trust, and you start by talking to the people that you know have common concerns of yours. And so you start signing what's called authorization cards. Here's where it gets really fun. So the law, the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, says you need 30% of workers on authorization cards in order to file for a union. Well, that's a flawed fight because you need 50 plus 1% of workers to win. And so if you file for an election with 30%, you're already losing. And so as a rule, most labor unions don't file for an election unless they have at least 70%. And so you get authorization cards. You continue to build support. And at this point, once you get your authorization card signed, you have a choice. The boss actually has a choice, which is interesting. And so at this point, the workers go to the boss and say, hey, boss, a majority of us really want a union. We've all signed cards. Yeah, that's what we want. What do you say? And the boss has a choice. And the boss goes, he can be a responsible boss and say, oh, my workers want a union? I didn't know that. I'm going to recognize their union. Boom, you're recognized. I've only seen this happen, well, now 3 times, but before Bernie Sanders did this, I've never seen this happen. So this does not happen often. Bernie actually signed a neutrality agreement. So his workers could have free and fair access to workers, which was amazing. And he decided, you know what, once 50% of my workers want a union, boom, I'm recognizing them. Let's go bargain a contract, right? The Virginia Democratic Party did this as well. They signed a neutrality agreement, and Lee Carter, a very progressive candidate here in Virginia, also signed a neutrality agreement. This doesn't happen. This is the exception to the rule. It's not the rule, because what usually happens when the workers go to the boss and say, hey, boss, we want a union. The boss goes, oh, you want a union? Oh, man, no. Cool.
That's funny.
Take it to an election. Okay? Yeah, it's cute. It's cute. And what happens is the workers have to then file for an election with the National Labor Relations Board, which is a government agency, which is overworked and understaffed. And so it takes them forever to actually set up an election, which buys the boss time to beat up on the workers a little bit. See, the boss is smart. He's playing the long game. And so, the boss gets to beat up on the workers a little bit and tell them all these crazy things about the union. Now, I will say this, the law says that workers have the right to freely and fairly organize a union, and they are not to be reprimanded or retaliated against or fired, terminated, none of that for organizing. As we know in this country, bosses and corporations break the law all the time, and there are no consequences to these things. There's tons of things your boss can't do in these moments. They can't threaten your job. They can't threaten to fire you because you're supporting a union. They can't threaten to shut the plant down because you're organizing. They can't do any of those things, but they do them all the time.
So the fear they've been stuffing down your throat is a complete lie.
That's exactly right. And Lisa's right. They feed off of fear. And we'll talk a little bit later about like actual boss tactics, because it's important to understand, because these tactics, these fear tactics, the division tactics, they exist in politics. They exist in community organizing. They exist in labor organizing. And so the tactics are always the same. So once workers get through that and they actually get to an election, they get to vote on their union. And so 50+1, there's a union victory. Yay, workers get their union. If it's a tie, 50-50, they lose. They don't get to organize again for another year. It's 49-51, they lose. The boss wins, they don't get to organize for another year. So I always like to quote Omar from The Wire, when you come for the king, you best not miss. This is the section, when you come for the king, you best not miss. We want to make sure when workers organize, they win. We have a union certification, which just means that their union is recognized. And then they go into what's called collective bargaining. And this is where you actually get to sit down and bargain a contract with your boss. And then workers get to vote on that contract. Now, the problem with the law right now, it says that you get a year to bargain a first contract, and that's okay. And so employers like to drag their feet on this part too. They just take it nice and slow. And so, the law is really not set up for workers. Right now, it's actually the AFL Week of Action. We have this amazing piece of legislation that's trying to get passed. It historically passed in the House. Now we're trying to get it passed in the Senate. It's called the PRO Act. And what the PRO Act does is a lot of things, but it makes it easier for workers to organize unions, and it guarantees, it sets consequences if companies do things like dragging their feet when it comes to getting a contract.
Dragging your feet equals more time for misinformation to spread.
Exactly. And people leave, right? A year is a long time. People get tired, they leave, they find other jobs, and so if they can just drag it out, and sometimes they drag it out longer than a year, it's it's really not on the side of workers to organize, which is unpleasant or unfortunate. And so that's kind of the union process. You know, it's again, it's a long and complicated process that the law has set up for workers to organize. And so these great folks, this is one of the best union campaigns I ever had the pleasure of being a part of. Is Lipton Tea in Suffolk, Virginia. So Suffolk is located way on down in Virginia, almost near North Carolina. It's in the swamps of Virginia. It's kind of on the eastern bank. And I got a call one night from a man with a nice southern drawl. And he said, you know what, I work at Lipton and we need a union. And I said, well, what's going on? And he said, they're working us to death. We're doing 12-hour shifts, and they're doing mandatory overtime, which means that we're working 13 days in a row. We get 1 day off, and then we're doing 13-day, 12-hour shifts again, and people are just tired. And that's all he would tell me. He was very succinct. This is what we need. We need a union. I said, okay. I walked him through the process, and he had a target of going and talking. It was a plant of about 200 folks. And he had a target of going and talking to 5 people that he trusted. Now, 9 times out of 10, that's the last time I'm going to hear from them. They go talk to their coworkers. Their coworkers go, "You're crazy. They're going to shut the plant down." It's still the only Lipton tea plant left in North America. And so if you buy Lipton bagged tea, it's probably coming from Suffolk, Virginia. And it's not to give the story away, but it's probably coming from UFCW labor. Which is kind of cool. You know, so I didn't expect to hear from him again. And about a week later, he called me and he said, can you be down here on Tuesday? And I said, sure. What you need on Tuesday? And he said, I got some people together to have a meeting. I said, cool. How many people? 30. 30? What happened to 5, man? And he said, 30 people want to come. So organizer math means if 30 people say, yeah, I'm going to come out, that means about 20, maybe 15 will. You always slice it in half. And so, you know, I went down there in July of 2016, and he wanted to meet behind this steakhouse in Suffolk, Virginia, Georgia Steakhouse. If you're ever in Suffolk, I'd suggest you go by there. And it's a big abandoned parking lot. And so it's blazing hot in the swamps of Virginia. And I'm waiting. And all of a sudden, I see these huge trucks come rolling in with all of these Trump flags flying. And I was like, oh my goodness, I've been set up. They're going to put my body in a swamp. I don't know if I'm going to get out of here, right? And all these people rolled in. It was mainly white workers. And they said, all right, let's do this. It was supposed to be 30 people. It ended up being 37. It's the only meeting I've ever had where I've had more people show up and said they were going to attend. And they all signed cards. They all said, we're ready to do this. And they were just angry, and they were emotionally fed up. And so they worked, and they got a majority, and they organized. This is a lot of them. This is the guy at the top right on the very end on the left, the white guy. He was actually the one who started it. And they're all out there talking to their coworkers on breaks and shifts, and they were just mad. They were mad as hell that things were happening. Now, the craziest thing about this story is that this story is not without its problems and its consequences. The racial divides here were huge. This plant, when it first opened, was segregated. And workers inside the plant still acted like it was segregated. You would go into the cafeteria when we finally won. I got to go into the cafeteria, and the white workers would sit on one side and the black workers would sit on another side. They would talk to each other, but they wouldn't sit together, right? And the black workers were on the night shifts, and mostly the white workers were on the day shifts. And so, you know, it was incredibly difficult to get these workers to talk to each other and to trust each other because of the huge historical divides. But the one thing that united them was that they were pissed off and they were just done with it. And, you know, the company tried all sorts of wonderful tactics. The first thing I always tell people is they're going to throw you a pizza party. Don't be shocked. The boss is going to try and buy your love with pizza. Sure enough, first thing the boss did. Well, first thing the boss did actually was get fired. They were like, oh, that plant manager isn't cutting it. So they brought in somebody else. And so that plant manager brought them all pizza. And one of my favorite stories is from a guy named Melvin. He had a bright pink mohawk. And he walked into the cafeteria where the pizza was, and he was like, there's not enough pizza in the world to fix this shit, you know? And I knew at that point we were on to something. And so, you know, they were just pissed. No pizza. They actually immediately cut out overtime. They stopped them. They said, we're done. You're not, they called it drafting. And so they were winning without even winning their union. And so they voted. They went to a vote, and they did win their union. And this is them. They got to sit across the table. So when you bargain with management, now it's via Zoom because of lovely COVID, but you actually sit across the table. The guys on the right here are management, and everybody on the left is union or workers. And so workers actually get to sit across from management. The funny thing about this picture is I asked if I could take a picture. I just meant of the bargaining team, and management like started smiling and like fixing their shirts. And I was like, oh, okay, we're taking a picture of everybody at the table. So this is one of my favorite pictures ever because of management just grinning away that they were there. And so, you know, that's power right there. That they overcame racial divides, that they overcame these huge cultural divides, that they were able to organize and sit across. And you can see this whole management team here is white. There was not one. Oh, I'm sorry. There was one on the very end where you can't see her, was one African-American woman who came in and took notes for their administrative team. And so, you know, that was a big deal. And so they won their union. They won their first contract a month and some change later. And so that's what workers can do when they stick together and when they're just angry. So we hear a lot in the South about, you know, yeah, unions used to be relevant. They used to be important, but you know, people don't need unions anymore. They just take your money, you know, they don't do anything. And so is that true? Are unions still important? And I would say, yeah, I know I'm a little biased, but especially after this last year we had. So this is a study. It's the most recent one that I could find. COVID kind of flipped everything on its head, but this study was done in 2019 in Washington State. By the way, Washington State has one of the highest union percentages. The national average of union density, by union density, I mean union workers per capita. And so like union density is usually around 10% here in the country currently. And they have 20%. And so this just shows what can happen when workers have access to unions and the things that unions can do. They did a study and they found that unions raised Washington workers' wages by $1.8 billion. And that's just from 20% of the workforce being unionized. Also, Washington, anecdotally, has a minimum wage of $13.69 an hour, and I think they were the first state to win 15, or a path to 15. Unions increase access to health insurance and pensions. They found that 94,000 more workers have access to health care because of unions. They also found that 142,000 more have access to retirement plans. They found that union workers are less likely to use public safety nets, and that unions lessen gender and racial wage gaps. Also, unions help set the standard for non-union workplaces, right? We fight for industry-wide wages, minimum wage. Right now in Virginia, we're fighting for more minimum wage and paid sick time, benefits, access to Medicare for all, workmen's compensation. These things are laws now because workers fought for them. OSHA regulations, which make sure that you're safe. Again, government agency, it does what it does, but it's there. Family Medical Leave Act, making sure that you can take time away from work if you need it. And the Fair Labor Standards Act, which sets minimum wage and also sets the weekly work hours at 40. So these things are all only because workers fought for them, and now they have become law. You know, JFK said it best when he said, those who would destroy or further limit the rights of organized labor, those who would cripple collective bargaining or prevent the organization of the unorganized, do a disservice to the cause of democracy. So, you know, we got the facts, we got the figures, we got the way to do it. And so everybody in the world is going to be unionized, right? No, we've got like 10% of America. And that's because facts and figures don't matter. Our comms guy, Jonathan, is always reminding me that our cause will not result in social change because it is morally right, factually accurate, or widely popular. Think about the Trump administration, right? They were not morally right. They were definitely not factually accurate. And in the beginning, they weren't necessarily widely popular. Yet they won. He won all the time, right? And so our opponents have none of these things, and they're consistently winning. And so how do we win? It's hard to win. These systems of power are designed to stay in power. No one taught me in school what to do if my boss was violating my rights. People don't teach you how to stand up to oppression. They want to keep you under their heel, you know? And so the statistics—
there might be a reason your teacher never taught you that.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't want us uprising against them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, the statistics before, and this is before the Trump administration and before all the things that he did at the labor board, but the statistics are that 1 in 10 companies that want unions get to campaigns. They get to the point where they're getting cards signed. 1 in 20 get a win. 1 in 40 get a contract. So the system is set up against workers. And bosses fight dirty. And so I want you to hear a little story from this guy. His name's Martin Levitt. But he was a professional union buster for years. And he has a book out called, it's an old book, but it's interesting, called Confessions of a Union Buster. So.
I conducted in excess of 200, almost 250 anti-union campaigns. And during that same period, I lost only 5. I never called myself a union buster. And most union busters today, unless they're in private circles, don't call themselves union busters. They call themselves labor relations consultants, employee relations consultants, human resource consultants, any benign label they can give themselves. So a union buster without the atmosphere or climate of fear is like working without one leg and one arm. I mean, fear is essential. Fear is like caviar, lobster, and filet mignon. A union buster can't, along with breaking the law, the emotion and element of fear is vital. There isn't a practicing union buster that can be successful if he doesn't break the law routinely. And I'm not just talking about labor law. Workers unfortunately know that management is historically anti-union. So it's a big step for them to develop the courage. Union busting is a lot of divide and conquer. So the more we knew about the demographics and the individuals, the more we could set them up. We would pit religion against religion, race against race. We would use background information to set people up in some vicious ways, to plant false rumors, to ruin lives, if you will. When a union buster is hired, he becomes the producer, he becomes the director, he becomes the choreographer, he becomes the scriptwriter. Nothing that happens in an anti-union campaign is spontaneous from management. Every word, every action, everything you see and some of the things that you don't see are all directed by the union buster. The people who really are the front line in an anti-union campaign are the first line supervisors. They are the backbone of management. That without them and without their commitment to this campaign, the union will probably prevail. And they will be told, the campaign, the war, is going to be your number one priority. That if productivity slacks and falls back, or anything else lessens from your responsibilities, not to worry. As long as what you were doing was campaign-oriented, it's okay. In the end, the employees will not be voting for or against the union. They'll be voting for or against you. What beat me were the following. Inoculation did beat me when the workforce was prepared. Rage beat me, and when I say rage, when inoculation is put in force with employees and they see it come true, it creates a feeling of rage. How could the company be doing something like this? You know, I never thought they had it in them. And that rage translates to a solidarity, which also beat me. And what beat me the most effective weapon you have to bust a union buster is exposure. People believe that companies will fight a union to whatever extreme for economic reasons, for bottom line, for profit, that it's all about economics. I learned over the 19 years that I was on the dark side, and I continue to have reinforced over these last 15 years, that there is one motive, and one motive only, for this obsession of union busting. And in a word, it's control.
I love the scary music behind him. It makes it just 10 times more ominous, right? But he's right. And he's right about division. We were organizing a group of truck workers in Maryland, and it was a very split workforce. It was African American and Latino workers, and they used to split them up and do anti-union meetings with them. And they had a black union buster talk to the African American folk, and they'd be like, you don't need that union. It's just for those, those guys over there who don't know their rights. They're not from this country. They don't speak English. You don't need that. And then they would tell the Latino workers, you don't need that union. It's just for those lazy black guys over there. You guys work hard. And then they would all come to the union meeting and talk to each other about what the union buster said about everybody. And so, division and fear is what they prey on. How the boss keeps us disorganized. This is a great chart from an organization called Labor Notes. The boss relies on fear, hopelessness, division, confusion. We need, as the organizers, tap into righteous anger. We need to develop a plan to win, identify common ground, and interpret and share information, right? And workers hopefully will find the courage to act. They'll have hope that things are possible, that change is possible and worth fighting for, that they're going to be unified and act together, and hopefully enough clarity to see through the boss's bullcrap, right? So let's talk about the South. That's why we're here. Let's talk about the South and what's really going on. The strategy in the South is a mess, and I love it. Union density in the South is less than half of the national average, falling well below 5%. And there's a reason for that. But the strategy to win in the South is the same way that you defeat a union boss. You know, through organizing, through inoculating, telling people what's going to happen, by getting them angry, and then giving them a plan to win, no matter what it is. And so history, labor unions in the South have a torrid history. And like Lisa was talking about earlier, you know, unions really gained momentum and power quickly during the Industrial Revolution, and mainly in the North, right? Working conditions, not to say that working conditions in the South were any better, but working conditions in the North were really broadcast. They had children working in labor mills and textile mills, and just horrific things were happening. And so that's where really unions gained organizing momentum. And Southerners, and again, this is kind of a brief, very eagle-eye view of what happened here, but Southerners saw industrialization and union organizing as kind of a threat to their agricultural way of life, right? We don't want that coming down here. And Southern politicians really took advantage of this fear and used it to set in motion anti-union laws and rhetoric that still echo in the South today. There's this weird Southern pride that exists. I hear it all the time when I talk to Southern workers about unions. They're just like, oh, we ain't got unions down here. We don't need none of that, right? We don't have unions down. We don't need that. We're anti-union down here. They don't really know why. When you start digging, you're like, well, why, right? But it's just this Southern pride anti-union thing. And part of that is because one of the unifying factors in the South have been around race. We divide ourselves a lot, even to this day, around race, not class solidarity. And what unions do is they get workers talking about issues across color, right? No matter, I tell workers all the time, whether you're black or white, the boss is still screwing you. The other problem is that very or little no union education in the schools exist or workforce. Even in Virginia, I think I learned a little blurb about like the triangle, you know, the fire that happened. And then it was like, oh yeah, unions made that better. And that was it. I was like, what? I didn't learn about unions until I got into the stores and I had a rep educate me. You know, and so Southern workers for a long time have been guinea pigs for the anti-union movement and strategies. And if they're going to try it anywhere in the country, they're going to try it here first and see if it works. So as unions, we need to be more inclusive and guarantee that our leadership and staff reflect the workforce that we're trying to organize.
Can I say something real quick right there?
Yeah.
So I'm multiracial. And when the boss comes for your race, it doesn't look blatant. It looks like you're a really hard worker, but you're not a good fit for us. There are ways that they use to target people that unions can stop if they organize together, that I have been victim of personally in other companies other than Kroger. When I came to Kroger, I found that I had people that had my back no matter what shape, color, religion, anything I was from. And that felt heartening. You can be part of something, whether you're, you know, how much they try to divide you, you can still be part of something.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So one of the major laws that they started passing here in the South, starting in Arkansas in 1946 and Florida in 1947, you know, Virginia followed soon in 1947, South Carolina actually happened in 1954, was this thing called right to work. And what right to work says is if you work for a union company like Kroger here in Virginia, you get to opt out of being a union member while you still get representation and benefits for free. The difference is that closed shop states like Maryland, DC, California, New York, if you work for a unionized company, you have to be a union member. And so where this came from was this wonderful man named Vance Muse. And he was an anti-union activist in Texas, in the South, and he coined this phrase. He's kind of credited with it, right to work. And he used these very segregationist views as an argument against unions, stating that from now on, white women and white men will be forced into organizations with Black African who they will have to call brother or lose their jobs. And so he really pitted white workers against Black workers and said, look, I've got a way for you to get out. And so, you know, when people talk about right to work laws, this is really, it came out of these very Jim Crow era laws. And in the South, the anti-union campaign never stops, even if there's not an active organizing drive, right? It's just nonstop. Well, we'll talk about politicians in a minute, but like workers in the South, it's not, I really believe that it's not that you guys are anti-union. It's that there's a lack of education and there's no union momentum. And you guys have been, we've all been oppressed to the point where we just don't know, right? And we've been just beat up for so long. And these are no longer just Southern issues. You know, it used to be, oh, right to work, that's just in the South. That's a South issue. That's a Southern issue. You don't ever have to worry about it here. And the truth is now that 27 states in this country have right to work laws. West Virginia and Kentucky are the most recent, and that went in 2016, 2017. And nobody ever thought West Virginia, although it's, you know, a very red state, they have such a labor, you know, history with coal miners that they were ever going to go right to work. And I remember being out there and these Republican voters who voted for these guys, they were like, they promised us they weren't going to do this. The very first bill they put out of the Senate was House Bill 1. They called it Workplace Freedom Act. And they were incensed that this was happening. And it's just, you know, that's what happened.
The title of these things, Workplace Freedom Act, Right to Work, it sounds so lovely.
Yeah,
it's tricky.
They are not. It's the old, frankly, I'm gonna say a word most Southerners don't like to hear, Jim Crow laws. That is just them in another mask. Like Kayla said, unions don't just come out of thin air. People in the jobs have to want them. You know, so they're taking away a right to organize that should be given to them.
Yeah, and it's just, you know, MLK called right to work for less, and what it does is it well, this is, you know, what it happens is that fewer workers join the union and pay dues, and so unions have less resources to work with, but I still have to represent all workers. So if I've got a shop of 100 workers and only 50 of them are members, I still have to legally represent them. So I have less collective resources, which means that we have less collective bargaining power because you're only working with 50% of the workers, and the boss looks at that and goes, 50%, not even enough of them care to be in the union. So why would I give a shit about making their wages better or their benefits better, right? And so you get less collective bargaining power, which means that workers get more frustrated, right? Which means that you get less dues because workers are frustrated, and it's just this like vicious cycle. So that's how, you know, right to work is meant to break unions. It's meant to stretch resources to the point where unions break. And the truth is,
comment about this actually, Kayla,
yeah.
You want to hear this where we are right now. Renee Smith said that she doesn't really understand the situation here in South Carolina. That we're, you know, a right to work state, so union membership can't be a condition of employment, but why aren't there more unions? I don't think hospitality and food service workers are unionized in South Carolina. Why aren't state workers unionized? In California, you know, state workers are unionized. And in Pennsylvania, like my parents were state workers, they were unionized. And she also says, why aren't university faculty unionized, and why aren't like tradespeople unionized? So that's kind of her question.
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is I don't know. I wish I knew why they weren't organized. But the truth is exactly what we're talking about here, right? There's a lack of education. There's a lack of access. unions don't in these states have resources. So my job is to go out and talk to these workers about how to organize. And there's one of me and 40,000 unorganized workers, right? And so the union resources aren't there to be able to do these things. I agree with you. There are some grocery workers in South Carolina that are organized. We have a sister local down there, so some Krogers are organized in certain parts. State workers and public sector workers are just now starting in southern states to win the right to organize. In Virginia this year, they just won the right to collectively bargain. And so, you know, I agree with you that there should be more unions. I don't understand why there aren't, but the truth is that there's just not the long arm. There needs to be more education about it and access to it, and unions can only do so much.
A lot of times there's fear to reach out to somebody like
Kayla. Absolutely. You know, people are afraid, just, you know, that they're just terrified. And that's a big part of it as well. And so I don't have an answer for you on why they're not organized. I wish that they were, but the only thing I can tell you is a lack of education, a lack of access, and then fear, and how the boss keeps us disorganized.
Right.
You know, and we have these facts. We know that right to work increases poverty rates by 15%, that workplace, you know, the risk of workplace death, it increases. Like, all of these happen in right to work states, but they don't happen in these closed shop states. But again, facts and figures, we're emotional beings. We make decisions and things off of emotion and not necessarily facts and figures, right? You also, like, in the South, have these really intense anti-union politicians who like to get involved in union organizing drives. In South Carolina, my favorite is Nikki Haley. When Boeing was trying to organize in 2014, she actually said, it's not something we want to see happen. You know, we discourage companies that have unions from wanting to come to South Carolina because we don't want to taint the water. She also said of union busters that she wore high heels to kick, she was how did she say it? She said, I wear high heels to kick out union thugs seeking to gain a foothold in South Carolina. Yeah, she was very fun. And then Bill Lee in 2019, Bill was a governor of Tennessee, and he went into the Volkswagen plant and led a captive anti-union audience meeting that got released, the video recording or the audio clip of it. And so you have these politicians too who are working against unions, right? And they threaten people's tax breaks. They threaten they threaten companies' tax breaks. They go, oh, if you go union, we're not sure if we can keep giving you tax breaks. You know, so there's a whole host of reasons for why.
So would you say that if they're at will employees, is that a threat to organizing?
Absolutely. And the truth is that a lot of people believe that at will only exists in right to work states, and that's simply not true. At will employment exists anywhere you don't have a contract. And so, you know, if you're an at will employee and you decide to rise up against your boss, even though the law says that you have the right to do it, that's a very real fear that people are going to lose their jobs. Absolutely. And people right now are just trying to survive, right? Put food on the table.
Yeah, that is a good point. When you mentioned how people can decline the union membership in these right to work states. So Jim has a question, and he checked in the beginning, and he said he was with PATCO. Okay, yeah, PATCO, and a past representative, organizer 1969 to 1981.
Nice.
But so he wanted to know, do you have to carry non-union members' grievances to arbitration?
Yes. I am legally bound to represent union and non-union workers the same way. I cannot discriminate. And so if I choose not to represent a non-union member in a union shop, or they feel like I haven't represented them to the best of my ability, I can have something called a ULP filed on me. A DFR. A DFR. A ULP is an unfair labor practice charge, which we can file against employers or unions for violating your rights. A DFR is a duty of fair representation. And so what would happen if if Lisa was a non-union member, I would never put you on that, Lisa. But if she was a non-union member and she had a grievance, so meaning that her rights had been violated under the contract and I didn't represent her, I said, nah, I'm not going to represent you. She could file charges against me and our union could be sued. Yes. It's one of the rare industries that I have to work for folks for free who aren't paying their fair share. And that's a great question. Yeah. So I'm not.
Sorry, that's one of the main things that gets passed around by bosses is, oh, they have to represent you anyway. Why would you join?
Yep. That's what, we hear it all the time. You got to represent me anyway. Why would I join? Right. And despite all of these things, workers are still organizing in the South. The workers, the South has some of the best labor history ever. And so it's really unfortunate that these anti-union things happen there. For sake of time, I'm not going to show it, but there's a fantastic video about the Amazon workers in Alabama who organized. They're still fighting that fight right now because Amazon did some horrible, horrible things there. They spied on workers and threatened workers and all sorts of stuff. They actually changed the traffic lights where labor organizers couldn't talk to people at the stoplight. Yeah, so they did a bunch of stuff. So I would encourage folks to look that up. But what do we got to do to win in the South? It's the same thing we got to do to win labor organizing wherever we are. We got to meet people where they are and agitate around our commonalities and not our differences. The guy who started the Lipton Tea campaign was a white Southern man, MAGA supporter through and through. He used to wear a red hat at the bargaining table. Bless him, right? But he was a proud union supporter. But if I met him on the street, I would have been like, this guy is never going to support the union. But it was just because he was pissed off about what was going on to him. And so we have to meet people where they are, recognize that we're not going to agree with them on everything. But if we can find common things and organize around those, we're going to win. We need to see the South for what it is. We need to stop saying that it's, the South is a monolith. That's lazy. That's an excuse. It's not this impenetrable anti-union thing, right? The South is a large, diverse area, and it's just been beaten up by anti-union rhetoric. And we need to recognize, train, and fund Southern leaders. A lot of times folks come down to the South and try and organize and, we're like these new school carpetbaggers. We don't need to do that. We need to find and train Southern leaders where they are.
South is changing as well.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah.
It's, like, as if you look at the votes of the last election, if you look at the organizing that's taken place recent times, it's people are moving, the demographic is changing, and it's about time that we come together and unite around our commonalities here,
Yep, I agree. And it's only because of grassroots organizing and already doing that the South is changing, right? If somebody had said to me 20 years ago, Virginia's going to be a blue state, I would have laughed. I'd have been like, yeah, what are you smoking, right? But here we are. It's
same here.
Blue state, and it's legal to smoke that now here, which is nuts. So, I would have never thought. I thought we would have been the last state on the planet to ever get there. But it was only through the hard work and organizing around common interests that we were able to get there. So we need to do things like invest in the South. We have to do long-term planning and jobs for organizers, not just hot shops or contract campaigns or these hot issue, right? We need to do long-term planning and investment. We need to hire folks from the community. We need to fight for the expansion of voting rights. We need to fight to ban the box, which means giving ex-felons fair shots at jobs. And we need labor. Labor need to stand with communities of color and undocumented folks when they are under attack. For a long time, we were silent on the BLM movement. Mike Brown's mother, UFCW member. Philando Castile was, I'm pretty sure he was a Teamster, right? These are our workers who are being attacked. And so we need to stand with them because attacks on them is an attack on labor. we need to take leadership roles. We can't be afraid of this as Southerners. We need to identify and develop other leaders. We need to get more young folks involved. We need the youngins, okay? I'm 38. It scares me when I'm the young one in the room. I ain't no youngin anymore. So we need to get more young folks involved. We have
there was
to
a meeting. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
That I got to go to a few years ago, and they asked everyone in the room under 40 to stand up. It was me and one other person.
Man, that breaks my heart. That breaks my heart.
We can do better. You can do better.
We have to do better. If we don't, we are dying out, and the next generation is not going to stand up. And the greatest thing about this next generation that's coming in, they're the most mobilized and in tune generation that has ever existed. So we need to use them and get them moving with us. So take them under your wing. Adopt a Gen Zer. I know they're annoying. My sister is 21. Okay. Actually, my sister is 21 and she just moved to Spartansburg, South Carolina. So she's very excited to be down there. But adopt a Gen Zer. We need to create a program that adopt a Gen Zer.
Yes.
But we need to push for education in our organizations and schools around the labor movement. And so we win by identifying people's issues and getting them angry. We give them hope that if they organize, change is possible. We let workers lead, and we listen and learn and amplify their stories. And I'm going to end, this is one of my favorite videos. This is from the Met coal strike that's happening in Alabama right now. And you would never think these coal miners have been on strike for a long time. And black, white, they too are just pissed off. Oops, we got to start it from the beginning, I guess. There we go.
I was just picketing back and forth every time the sheriff officer asked me to stop to let as we call them, scab in and out of the mine. I always did exactly what he asked me to do and stopped. I was walking and a guy decided to turn in. All of a sudden, I was not even in the center of the road, and he hit me on the right side of my body and kept on going.
So probably 6 or 8 of us were walking back and forth here, and this Mazda pulled in here without any kind of warning. The lady almost next to me had her back to the road. He struck her along the arm and then grazed her back as he went in. Deputies didn't do anything about that until we pointed out that he had struck her.
The sheriff told me that another sheriff would have to see it probably for there to be probable cause.
They saw it, and she wasn't even in the road. He just literally hit her with his car.
I drank their Kool-Aid in the beginning, and look where it got me. That's what it got me.
Like they messed over us with our jobs, our insurance, messed us out of our jobs, and our families are paying for it. And on top of that, they want us to be mistreated on the picket lines.
This company has been absolutely horrible over the last 5 years to work for. These people are just trying to get back what they lost 5 years ago, and this is what they see out here every day on the picket line. This is not the first person that's been struck by a vehicle, and so far the authorities have done absolutely nothing about this, and it's time for a little equal justice here and equal treatment.
I love that video from a man in the overalls. He's like, I drank their Kool-Aid in the beginning. Look at what it got me. And he's missing 2 fingers, right? And so it's a perfect example of just how getting mad is gonna get you to where you need to be. Yeah, so that's all I have. I can't get my
are you familiar with when the West Virginia teachers went on strike a little couple years ago?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, that is something I know we probably have some public school teachers watching from South Carolina, and they have been, like fighting for a while. So I don't know if you could talk about anything that they did in West Virginia.
Yes. So interestingly enough, in West Virginia, a lot of people think it was legal for them to go on strike. It was not. It was a completely illegal action, but because they all did it, I mean, all of them did it and did it together and stood together. The state had no choice but to give them what they wanted and then to let them walk back into the schools unscathed. Just like in Virginia, teachers in Virginia just won the right to try and collectively bargain here. And so, up until this year, and still there's a whole lot of things going on with public sector workers, but up until this year, it was illegal for teachers to also organize in Virginia, but they were able to win things by sticking together. And so, that was an amazing moment. My favorite part of that strike was when the union leader came out and was like talking about what they won and it wasn't good enough for the teachers. And they were like, boo, go back in. And he had to go back in and be like, it wasn't good enough, and got more for them. And so, sometimes we also have to hold our labor leaders accountable for what they're bargaining for us. But yeah, that was an amazing, amazing, amazing strike.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are frustrated here in the South, especially. And while, some Southern states are definitely changing, it doesn't really seem like South Carolina is changing along with it. November 2020, our state legislature, the Democrats got like creamed. So we have an even bigger gap between, the Democrats in our state house and the Republicans. They have an even greater lead now. So while we have like great things happening in Georgia and some good stuff happening in North Carolina, like we're still struggling here in South Carolina. So
I will say that it's possible. Like I said, I've been a Virginian. I've lived in Virginia my whole life. And if somebody had said to me, prior to the blue wave of Obama, that this state is going to go blue, I would have never believed it. I started on politics and organizing in politics. And, and again, we have some very deep red areas, but we're able to flip some of those areas by doing things like Lisa right now is out with us doing member to member organizing. And so her job right now is political organizing. She's working on some of the political races that we have here in Virginia. And her job is to make sure that unions are talking to their workers about what's at stake here. And so it's really a whole yarn, a whole ball of wax when you don't have strong labor unions who have organized resources.
Let me tell you, it feels so good to know that you did something, anything, you know what I mean, at this point.
Yeah. And we're in Virginia right now, extremely afraid that what's going to happen in this interim election, because we have a governor race, and it's going to be interesting, but we're afraid that there's going to be a red wave here, right? And they're going to win it. Historically, that's what happens. They win the governorship, Dems get crushed, and our lovely blue state is no longer blue anymore. So we're hanging on by by some threads here. So, it's possible, and it's only possible by taking those very first steps. Getting one other person involved, going outside of your comfort zone and talking to somebody about issue-based organizing, right? That's all it takes, is just one more and one more and one more and one more. So don't be discouraged. I know I'm a labor organizer in the South. I get it. It's like pushing a boulder up a hill and having that boulder coming back down, but it's possible. There's always hope.
Yeah, it's frustrating. I've been here almost, I guess, going on 6 years now, but I'm from Pittsburgh, so not very pro union area. Union and Yeah, fun times here down in South Carolina. But
yeah.
what would you recommend for some people who might want to do some more reading or kind of get themselves like brushed up with labor organizing or like the history of unions, or even like if they want to get involved in some sort of, organization to do like issue-based, organizing, what would you say?
So there are some wonderful, wonderful books on organizing. Labor Notes has some great stuff. Labor Notes has one of my best books ever. It's called Secrets of a Successful Organizer. It talks about the boss fight, how the boss keeps us disorganized. It's got all of these wonderful charts and information in it. It's only like $15. And so that's a great place to talk about, like, if you really want to get to understand campaigns and the fundamentals of campaigns and campaign tactics and things. There's also really some great books around, particularly coming out now, around civil rights organizing and how unions were a part of that, right? And around like BLM and things like that. And so there's wonderful stuff. Google, the wonderful internet, has tons of it. And, simply just Googling organizing in the South. It's a hot topic issue. People have eyes on the South because, again, these used to be just seen as Southern issues. Oh, it's just those dumb Southerners. They don't know anything, right? It's not anymore. These are nationwide crises. And so people are really looking to the South on how have you dealt with this for so long and still get some wins. And so just, Google organizing in the South. Great resources for getting involved in your state is your state labor federation. So your state, your South Carolina AFL-CIO, Google them in their website. They're going to be an umbrella organization for everything that's going on. Right now, it's a week of action for the PRO Act. We have some Democratic senators who don't want to sign on to the most expansive piece of labor legislation that we need. One of them is in Virginia, darling Mark Warner. So we're not that blue. So they're doing a whole lot of like action on trying to get those folks to move. But there's tons of stuff happening. There's the strike in Topeka, Kansas that's happening. There's the Alabama UMWA strike that's happening. There's a lot happening, and a lot happening in the South.
Yeah, that was super, super informative. And definitely, I think, very needed. So actually, I don't even know if I might have told you this. Mercurius dragged me into joining the Labor Caucus for the Carolina Democratic Party. So I'm going to have them all watch this.
Oh Lord. Hi, guys.
All but like one of them have either the same or less experience as me. So they will, but like everyone will all benefit from like watching this. I obviously learned things and will always learn things. It's fun times being a steward alongside.
Yeah, and you were one of my best, I will say, and I appreciate you continuing the fight. And the cool thing about this is that I've been doing this for a long time and I still learn things, right? Like, I don't have a magic bullet for organizing. If I did, the whole world would be union and I could lay on a beach and rescue puppies, right? But here I am 10 years later. And so, I don't have, there's an art and a science to organizing, and the science of it is the things that we kind of know about, like, getting people angry and giving them hope. The art of it is your own swagger and how you approach people. The other thing I'll say is that the amazing thing that happened from the Sanders campaign organizing and the Warren campaign organizing is that all of you scattered and went to nonprofit groups and went to other political campaigns and other, places, and all took that labor knowledge, and hopefully it was a good union experience, and, walked away with some information and started organizing there. I got on a Zoom call a couple months ago for someone who was a former Bernie Stewart working at a nonprofit, and there were 8 former Bernie people on there. And they were like, we all work at this nonprofit. We want to organize now. And so I pointed them in the right direction. And guess what? They had their union recognized about a month ago. And so there's this resurgence in nonprofit organizing. It's booming right now. Political campaign workers are organizing. And so, there really is this amazing thing that's happening in these kinds of worlds and sectors. And so that's really exciting.
Yeah. No, I definitely think I think people like millennials specifically, so are getting reinterested in organized labor and unions, and Gen Z, they kind of just got everything going on. They have their heads in all of it. So
I know it's I wish I was as active as my 21-year-old sister is now. When I was 21, I'm like, man, it took me a lot longer to get to kind of, where I am.
Right.
And millennials, I'm an older millennial, and I think we're just tired of being expected to fit this ideal. Like, why don't you guys have better paying jobs? Why don't you own a house? Why aren't you having kids? Well, all of those things cost money and they're expensive and we can't afford them. Right. I have, and I think
we were treated to a job market that was stacked against us from the beginning.
Yeah.
And then we get to answer those type of questions, which will eventually make you angry and figure out how to organize. So some Gen Zer can observe it and know how to do it from the womb.
Yeah, exactly. It's, and I talk to workers every day and they're like, oh, I'm just going to leave. I'll leave. And it's like, where are you going to go? We see it happening now after COVID, that places are finally being forced to pay workers more. I just saw a sign the other day. It was like McDonald's workers starting at $18 an hour. They can't hire anybody. And so, I think workers are finally starting to see their worth, and hopefully we stick to our guns on these things. Like, we're worth more, and all workers are worth more. Like, this. One of the things we do a lot as workers is we say, well, that's just a burger flipper, right? I'm an EMT. Why do they get 15 and I don't? Well, maybe the argument isn't why do they get 15 and I don't? Maybe it's why aren't you getting more too? It's not us against them. We're punching across when we really should be punching up. And so I think millennials are just getting really sick and tired of punching across at each other. And we're starting to realize, oh, wait, maybe we need to punch up at those guys.
COVID was also a big leveler.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many people have said, thank goodness for the person who's stocking these shelves this week.
Oh, in the beginning, everyone was talking about grocery workers as superheroes. And then towards the end, like, well, why is no one working, and why do they deserve more than this? No, they should be fined on like $10 an hour. Right?
They went from heroes to zeros real quick. Right now, we're in the middle of renegotiating a contract at Kroger, which is a grocery store, and they forgot real quick about all the profit they made during COVID, and about how they gave their CEO a $22 million increase and cut hazard pay in May of 2020 when the hazard hadn't even started at that point. And then also additionally, Kroger did this really horrific thing where I think it was California, Lisa, where they shut down 4 stores because a state local ordinance got passed that workers would receive hazard pay. And Kroger was like, nah, we're just going to shut the store down. We're not going to pay them that.
They did that in several states, non-union places. And had they had a union, it may have been a different story. I mean, you say they forgot about their profits. No, they didn't. It went into their CEO's pocket.
That's it. Thank you. You're absolutely right. That's absolutely correct. That is correct. But,
we can change things.
Well,
yeah.
It's I think that is the one thing with COVID, that it did show a lot of people that their work is not being valued, and so a lot of folks are a little bit closer to being fed up, and perhaps that will benefit labor.
I agree. We were hoping that COVID would be this resurgence among workers, and it kind of was. But I think what we underestimated was the fear around COVID, the unknown and the not knowing. COVID, there was such an uncertainty with it. You were here one day, you're gone the next, right? I know we lost a very young Bernie Stewart in South Carolina, Joe, around it. And that was just flooring to me. And so it was just this fear of the unknown, and workers, while they were angry and mad and sad and just broken, they were also at the most scared they've ever been. And we really didn't weigh that enough, I think, as unions.
Yeah.
It was a lot of uncertainty, and I did a lot of interviews about it, and just the atmosphere in certain stores just permeated over and above the fear that the boss was giving you. You could just feel it from your customers as well. Yeah. So hopefully, things can take a swing for the better now, and we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, hopefully, and start to come together and right some of what was wrong during.
I agree. I think, Ashlyn, I think you're right when people saw their value, and I hope that they just remember that as things return back to normal, because normal wasn't working for a lot of people.
Right.
And so we need to carry that remembrance of value into that new normal.
Absolutely. So. I think that is a good spot up. Let's not be content with normal.
That's correct.
Not going to be good now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Maybe some people who want to organize their workplace will reach out to you.
Absolutely.
And I believe that is it. We've got, a couple comments just thanking you for being so amazing and informative. And I believe, this was a very educational presentation that you provided for us. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. Like I said, it's a very eagle-eye view of some very complex issues that are ongoing and ever changing. And so, but there's a lot of information out there for folks who want to zero in on some more stuff. So yeah.
Yes. And thank you, Lisa. Thank you for bringing Lisa.
Yes, always.
It's great to hear your story. And that video that you played, I hadn't seen it before. I don't know how I missed it. So thank you so much for sharing your experience, and keep kicking ass in Virginia.
Same in South Carolina.
Right back at you.
Try. All right, everybody, we are signing off. Have a good night. Thank you for watching. Take care.